We continue now at the top of Daf Yomi Gemara in Meseches Bava Metzia. This is Bava Metzia Daf 70b. The Mishnah says, "Ein mekablin tzon barzel mi Yisrael." One is not allowed to receive tzon barzel property from a Jew, mipnei shehu ribis, because it's considered interest. Avol mekablin tzon barzel min ha'akam, but one is allowed to receive tzon barzel property from a non-Jew. V'lovin mehen umalvin osan ribis. You're allowed to borrow from non-Jews, and you're allowed to lend to non-Jews with interest. And Rashi explains, "Ein mekablin tzon barzel." One cannot accept tzon barzel. What that means is, kol achrayis hanechasim al hamekabel. It means that the entire responsibility for the property is on the receiver, the person that's managing these items. He has all responsibility for those items. V'sham osam olav b'mos. He owes a certain amount of money. They evaluate the goods that he is taking, how much they are worth, and that's the amount that he's going to owe regardless. V'chol zman she'ein nosen lo ma'osav cholken haschar. Now, as long as he doesn't have to give him his money, so they divide all profits. And Rashi says, "V'afagav the Mishnah Yiserahi." Now, even though this is really an extra Mishnah, because we already said that you're not allowed to have a storekeeper. Let's say go in for half profit, mishum de mekabel olav palga behefsid, because he's accepting upon himself half of the losses as well. And so we said over there, since he's accepting half of the losses, so therefore half of this arrangement is really considered to be a loan, and then in return for the fact that he was extended a loan, he's exerting effort in order to make profit, and that was only accepting half of the losses. Certainly it's problematic over here because he's accepting responsibility for everything, not just on half of it, so therefore it seems to be extra. It's obvious that this would be a problem, but nakad le mishum seifa. But the reason why we have this in the Mishnah is because the end of the Mishnah, where it says avol mekablin tzon barzel min ha'akam, it says that it's permitted if you do it from a non-Jew. That's really the chiddush of this Mishnah. And the Mishnah continues, "V'chein beger toshav," the same halacha that applies to a non-Jew, that you could lend to a non-Jew or borrow from a non-Jew with interest, that applies to a ger toshav as well. A ger toshav is a non-Jew that lives in Eretz Yisrael, that keeps the Sheva mitzvahs b'nei Noach, is considered to be a non-Jew in this regard. Malve Yisrael ma'osav shalakom midas ha'akom. Finally, the Mishnah says that a Jew is allowed to lend out the money of a non-Jew if it's with the knowledge of the non-Jew, avolo midas Yisrael, but not with the knowledge of a Jew. And Rashi explains, midas ha'akom mefarish b'Gemara. This will be explained in the Gemara. And the Gemara says, "L'meimra divrashusa d'mekabel kaimut." Does our Mishnah mean to say that by nichsei tzon barzel, by what is essentially a guaranteed investment that's considered to be in the hands of the person receiving, in the hands of the person managing the property? That's what we seem to be saying, because it's considered to be a loan, and that's why it's a problem of interest. Or a minute, but we have the following contradiction. The Mishnah in Bechoro says, "Hamekabel tzon barzel min ha'nochrim." If somebody accepts an investment, and again, it's like a guaranteed investment that he's taking from the non-Jew, valdos petur min ha'bechora. So the offspring are patur from the laws of Bechora. It seems to be that the Mishnah is saying that the animals really belong to the non-Jew. Now, really, it should be, if it's tzon barzel, a guaranteed investment, really it should belong to the Jew. So why is it patur from the Bechora? That's the question of the Gemara. Rashi explains, de stam tzon barzel b'reshusa de mekabel kaima uvachrayuso, meaning he has full responsibility for the tzon barzel. That's the implication of our Mishnah, miniktani shu ribis, because it says in our Mishnah that it's ribis. But we say again in the Mishnah in Bechoros, it says, valdos petur min ha'bechora, the offspring is exempt from the laws of Bechora. Lomi boy imos. Now Rashi explains, we don't even need to talk about the mother animal, that original animal, the peturos min ha'bechora. That is certainly an exemption from the Bechora. Shem yol de bechora eno kadosh, meaning if she would give birth to a firstborn offspring, it would not have the kedusha Bechora. Sharehin atzman shal nachri, because again that animal belongs to the non-Jew. V'atorah amra b'Yisrael v'lo ba'acherim. The pasuk says it has to be by a Jew. Ela afilu valdos, but even the offspring, shechetzium shal Yisrael, meaning the offspring of this mother animal, so half that offspring does belong to the Jew, because the whole point is he's getting half the profits. But osan hamagian lechelek Yisrael petur min ha'bechora, even those that essentially are the portion of the Jews, they're also patur from the Bechora. If they were to get pregnant and if they were to have offspring, alma b'reshusa denosin kaim. You see that everything really is in the reshus of the one giving and not the one receiving. The ibach rise the mekabel kaim yamai petur, because if it was the responsibility of the one receiving, why would it be an exemption? Why would there be an exemption from the laws of Bechora? That should not be the case. And the Gemara continues, Amar Abaya says, Lo kash, it's not difficult. Hadam mekabel ala onsa v'zula in one case, meaning in the Mishnah in Bechoros, we're talking about where the original owner is the one that's accepting responsibility for any accidents or if it depreciates in value. Therefore, that's the non-Jew, the original owner who's taking responsibility. That's why it's the non-Jews and it's exempt from Bechora. But hadam lo kabel ala onsa v'zola, but in our Mishnah, by the Tzon Barzel, the original owner is not taking responsibility for accidents and for depreciation. Rather, it is the person receiving that is the one taking the responsibility, and that's why it's a situation of interest in our Mishnah. And so the Gemara continues, Rava said to him, Rava said to Abaya, if you're saying that in the Mishnah in Bechoros, the original owner, the non-Jew, is taking responsibility for everything, so it's Tzon Barzel Karisle, that's what you call Tzon Barzel? The whole point of Tzon Barzel is what we refer to as a guaranteed investment. You wouldn't call that Tzon Barzel. And the Gemara continues, Viod, and further, Adatani Seif, instead of saying at the end of our Mishnah, Avol Mekablin Tzon Barzel Minoakum, that you're allowed to receive Tzon Barzel from the non-Jew because there's no problem of interest by non-Jews. So liflug b'didei, you might as well make distinctions within the case itself. If cases of tzon barzel can be cases where the original owner does take responsibility or doesn't take responsibility, make that distinction. And you should say, b'med devarim amurim, when is it true that it's a problem of interest? The lo kabel alem moro unsavazula, that's talking about a situation where the owner does not accept responsibility for the accidents or the depreciation. Avol kabel moro unsavazula, but if the original owner would accept responsibility for the onus, for the accidents and the depreciation, so shaper dummy, so then it would be fine because it wouldn't be a problem of interest. And so therefore you can't give this answer that we're talking about a situation, or that Tzon Barzel can be talking about a situation where the original owner takes responsibility. Elamar Rava, rather Rava says, Idi v'idi de lo kabbalah la mara onsa v'zul. In both cases, our Mishnah and the Mishnah in Bechoros, the original owner is not taking responsibility for accidents or for depreciation. V'gabe Bechoros, and the real reason why by Bechoros, why by firstborn we say there's an exemption, even though essentially it really all is in the reshus of the Jew. Hainu tam, the reason is Hainu tam devlodos patur min habechora. The reason why the offspring is exempt from bechora, kevan de lo yoyev zuze, because let's say you have a situation where the Jew doesn't end up giving the money that he owes to the non-Jew. So what's going to happen? Asi nachri tafis lala behema. So the first thing the non-Jew is going to do, he's going to come along and he's going to take that exact animal. V'lo mishkach lala behema. And if he's not able to take that animal, if he doesn't find that animal, tafis luhu levlados, then he's going to take the offspring of that animal. Yad nachri b'emsen. So therefore, the hand of the non-Jew is in the middle, meaning he does have a hand in this property. V'chol yad nachri b'emsen. Anytime the non-Jew has some possession, so to speak, pater min habechora, the halach is there's an exemption from bechora. And the Gemara continues, quoting a pasuk from Mishlei, Mar behono b'neshech v'sar b'zlchonen dalim yikbetzenu. If somebody increases his wealth through interest, so it's going to be gathered eventually, that money will make its way to the poor. And the Gemara says, Mai l'chonen dalim, what does it mean that it's going to make its way to the poor? Amar Rav says, Kegon shvor malka, what it means is like King Shapur. And Rashi explains, Shavor Malka Melech Prasai was a Persian king. V'not el Mammon Yisrael, he would take money from the Jews. V'chonin b'hem dalim nachrim shem dalim and mitzvahs, and he would use that money for the poor. That actually refers to the non-Jews who are poor from mitzvahs. They don't have the mitzvahs. So the idea is essentially the money will be taken and given to the non-Jews. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Nachman said, Amar Lihuna, Rav Huna said to me, Lo nitzrucha ela da'afilu ribis over kochavim. This pasuk is needed, that's true even if a person takes interest from a non-Jew. That is true. Rashi says, Afilu ribis over kochavim. She Yisrael notel minha over kochavim. If a Jew takes ribis from a non-Jew, yored l'timayu, and that money as well is going to be lost. And the Gemara continues, Eisvei Rava Rav Nachman. Rava asked Rav Nachman the following question. The pasuk says, La Nachri Sashich. It says to the Nachri Sashich. And the Gemara says, Mai Sashich. What does it mean when it says La Nachri Sashich? Lav Sishoch. Doesn't it mean to say that you're allowed to take interest? That's Sishoch. You're allowed to take interest from a non-Jew. We just said above that you're not supposed to take interest from a non-Jew. Here it seems that you can take interest from the non-Jew. And the Gemara says, Lo, no, that's not what it means. It actually means Sashich. What it actually means is it's talking about paying interest to the non-Jew, and it's saying that you can pay interest to the non-Jew. The Gemara says, Lo sagi de lav hachi, but is it supposed to be like a mitzvah? It's a commandment. You must pay interest to the non-Jew. There's no other way to borrow from a non-Jew. And so the Gemara says to that, no, the chiddush of the pasuk, it's not saying you have to pay interest, it's saying you can pay interest to the non-Jew, and it's to exclude your brother, that you're not allowed to pay interest to your brother, you can't pay interest to a Jew. The Gemara says, but by your brother, there's already a pasuk for that. There's an explicit pasuk that says that you can't pay interest to your brother. And so therefore, what do you need the pasuk to say that by a non-Jew to infer to a Jew? And the Gemara says, it's in order that you're going to transgress both a positive and negative commandment. Meaning the pasuk says, la nochri sashich, that's a positive. We infer from that you're not allowed to pay interest to a Jew. And then you have also the pasuk says, uleachicha lo sashich, that's a negative commandment, again, that says that you're not allowed to pay interest to a Jew. And Rashi explains, my lav sishoch. Initially, the Gemara says that la nochri sashich really means la nochri sishoch, shemuter atol likach heimenu neshech, that it means to say you're allowed to take from the non-Jew interest. And then the Gemara said, no, that has nothing to do with what it means. Rather, it means lo sashich. It means dafka kamar atatain lo ribis. It means that you give. You can pay interest to the non-Jew. And the Gemara says, lo sagid alav hachi, doesn't mean you have to pay interest to the non-Jew. V'chiba akasav litzavos oleinu litein ribis lakum. The pasuk is commanding us to give interest to a non-Jew. De'ilu lahater kamar, because if you're saying it just means it's mutter to give interest to the non-Jew, pshita, that's obvious. Why should we say that it's forbidden? And so the Gemara says, actually, it is just to say that it's mutter, and the point is to infer that to a Jew it is usr. And the Gemara continues, Eisvei, we have a question from our Mishnah, Lovin mehenu malvin osam beribis. It says by non-Jews, you can borrow from them and you can lend to them with interest. It seems to be both directions as mutter, and again, we just said above that you're not supposed to take interest from a non-Jew. V'chein beger toshav, and the Mishnah said the same is true by a ger toshav. And the Gemara says, Amar Rav Chia Breder Rav Huna says, Lo nitzrucha ella. The Mishnah is necessary only for the following, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Ayin Aleph Amud Aleph.